صلى الله عليك يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله. صلى الله عليك يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله. يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة. يا غريب الغرباء، يا مظلوم كربلاء، السلام على من جعل الله الشفاء في تربته. السلام على من الإجابة تحت قبته. السلام على ساكن كربلاء. فيا ليتنا ثم يا ليتنا كنا معكم سادتي. يا سادتي فنفوز فوزا عظيما. أما بعد، قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم: اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. إن لقتل الحسين حرارة في قلوب المؤمنين لا تبرد أبدا. صدق الرسول وآمنا به. نوروا مجالسكم بذكر محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. I want you to draw a mental picture and to imagine yourself in this situation in order to appreciate the intensity of the message. You have to mentally try and place yourself in this situation. Yawmul Ashura, 61 AH, the day of Ashura. Sayyid al-Shuhada, the grandson of Rasulullah, standing on the plains of Karbala, hungry and thirsty for 3 days, under the scorching sun on the desert plains of Karbala, surrounded by enemies thirsty for his blood from every direction. His women are terrified. The children are crying out, Al-Atash, Al-Atash. 3 days, children are weeping and wailing due to this intense thirst. فَإِنْتَ جَنَابَكَ, it is as if you were there in Karbala, listening to them weep and wail. And this is your Madhloom Imam standing on the Maidan, surrounded by the decapitated and mutilated bodies of his companions, covered in wounds and blood. You have your Madhloom Imam in this situation, himself covered in blood. Allah. The poet Sheikh Muhammad al-Muhajiri says, my heart bleeds for that son of Fatima who stands on the plains of Karbala surrounded by companions who were killed and mutilated. He says, O son of Fatima, you stood on the plains of Karbala covered in blood, but which blood? Is it the blood from the wounds that you incurred, or is it from the blood of that infant Aliyun al-Asghar or Abdullah al-Radhi that you wiped on your face? For in such an environment, covered in his blood and covered in the blood of his infant child and children and companions, in this painful, sorrowful moment, Sayyid al-Shuhada cries out in Karbala. He makes a nida, calls out to the people, Hal min nasirin yansuruna, Hal min mughithin yughithuna. This is the Ma'soom Imam, grandson of Rasulullah, in this situation calling out, is there anybody to help us? Is there anyone who will come to aid us? This call of the Ma'soom Imam is not restricted to time or space. Imam has called out for companions, yes, in 61 AH, 1400 years ago, on the plains of Karbala. But today in the 21st century, this call of Imam al-Hussein still echoes and still resonates across the east of the world and the west of the world. And just like it was obligatory, just like the way it was wajib on each and every person on that day to respond to the call of the Imam, it is wajib in this day and age to respond to the Imam. Ma'soom Imam, his words are not restricted by time or space. His authority is not limited to a certain time or to a certain geographical area. La hujjatullah fil ard. Hujjah of Allah on earth. So long as this earth continues to exist, we have a responsibility and an obligation to respond to the call of that Imam. The hadith mentioned that as soon as the Imam made this final call for help, this call of help represented what? When Imam said, Hal min nasirin yansuruna, is there anyone there to help us, to come to our aid? What did this call represent? This was the nida of the Imam, the call of the Imam for the people to respond towards Tawheed. Because this battle of Karbala was such, as we have been discussing over the last few nights, the ultimate battle between Haqq and Batil. Imam al-Hussein was the representation of Tawheed in its entirety. To respond to Imam al-Hussein was to respond to Tawheed. Which is why you find within our Usuluddin, you have this concept that the Nusratul Imam is wajib. To respond to the Imam is wajib. When the Imam made that call, Ba'd itmam al-hujjah, there remained now no room for any excuse for anyone to remain neutral. Which is why the hadith mentions that as soon as the Imam made this call, everyone who heard this call and did not respond are deserving of eternal damnation. Including those who remained neutral, because silence is a sort of tacit approval. Imam to time or Islam is echoing after of respond. In fact, we are taught that to respond to this call is a central part of our faith, even in this day and age. Our entire life is a demonstration of our readiness to support the Imam who is in Ghaiba, one, and our entire life is a demonstration of the actual response. To respond, yani bitarika amali, bitarikin amali, through action. Why when you go, Imam as-Sadiq Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, front of and say, فَقَلَّكُمْ مُتَّكُمْ front of the great, say to him, submissive, every in line with your mu'ad for you. There the Imam is saying, هَلْ مِن نَاصِرٍ يَنْصُرُنَا, who is there to help us? And over here Imam as-Sadiq is teaching us, stand in front of Imam al-Hussein and say to him, وَنُصْرَتِي لَكُمْ مُعَدَّةٌ. Say to him, مُسَلَّمٌ شِيْءٍ عَظِيمٌ. على كل, you are telling, support you. And over here, Imam to the Imam, we need to understand, in order to Imam al-Hussein, when I support you, need to understand and towards Imam al-Hussein. And these two concepts are interrelated. Each one overlaps the other, and there are many dimensions of similarities, but there is a fine line again as well that divides between support and loyalty. You cannot support the Imam unconditionally unless you are loyal to him. And you cannot be loyal to the Imam unless you support him. Each and every one of you is a shepherd and you are in charge of your herd. Meaning that each and every one of you is responsible for this tabligh and responsible for the communities which you live in. The prerequisite for this, ilm. Look at the affairs of the Muslim Ummah in this day and age. Look at the state of Islam in the world. Corruption, deviation in every form. Why? Because that seerah, that true seerah of Rasulullah, that seerah of Amirul Mu'mineen has been neglected. Rather has been concealed from majority of the Muslims. And we talked about this from a number of dimensions over a couple of nights. But you find even from a political dimension, rates of corruption, statistics of corruptions when it comes to corrupt head of states, the highest statistics are from those countries that claim to be Muslim countries, that from those countries that claim to be followers of Islam. Which Islam are they implementing? Which role model are they implementing? Where is that pure seerah of Rasulullah and the seerah of Amirul Mu'mineen? Historians mention to us, look at the Rasulullah, head of state when the state was established in Medina. Head of state. Islam has become a superpower in the region of Hijaz. They were able to conquer and they were able to overcome the greatest opponents from the times of Jahiliyyah. This head of state, Rasulullah, who is presiding over a large geographical area whose influence is such that it has reached Habasha, and the king of Abyssinia, Najashi, has come within the fold of Islam. A man under whose feet, you could say, is unlimited wealth. You find that head of state, Rasulullah, in the battle of Khandak. Due to intense hunger, he has to tie a stone to his stomach. Where do you find Muslim leaders like these in history? Where do you find Muslim leaders like this? When we say that Islam gave us the best political system and the best system of governance, these were role models that we were given to implement and to walk in their seerah. Today you find those people who claim to be Muslims, who claim to be ruling in the name of Islam, devoured the wealth of the people. They themselves sleep with satiated stomachs, with full stomachs, while their citizens sleep by tying stones to their belly. Rasulullah as the head of state was different. My people, the citizen of my state, should sleep with a full stomach, while I, the leader, will sleep on a hungry stomach. أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب صلوات الله وسلامه عليه اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. Narration mentions that when the Zahiri Khilafah was given to him and he was ruling from Kufa, when Amirul Mu'mineen assumed this Zahiri Khilafah, يعني what we would say in this day and age, when he became head of state, Amirul Mu'mineen was ruling over a region that was equivalent to 50 present day countries. At that time, the Islamic Empire not only included the entire Hijaz, but had got to the boundaries of Azerbaijan, former Soviet Union, the boundaries of Afghanistan. On the other hand, it had come as far as Iran and had reached the shores, had covered majority of North Africa. Traditionally, what is mentioned in the hadith as Misr is not only present-day Egypt. La, that entire region of North Africa from Egypt to Morocco and Tunisia. 50 present-day countries. The economic state was such that policies to combat unemployment and poverty that were implemented by Amir al-Mu'mineen in a period of 4 years, the historians mention that his governor over North Africa would send the surplus khums to Hijaz. Allahu Akbar. What does this tell us? Khums, which is 20% of your savings, which the government will then use to build and fund the infrastructure, all that was a surplus. This tells us volumes of the standard of living of the people living in Africa under the rulership of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Subhanallah, today you find it to be one of the most poorest continents in the world. This Amir al-Mu'mineen, at whose disposal is the wealth of the strongest empire in the world, the historians mention that he comes to Masjid al-Kufa on the day of Jumu'ah to lead Salatul Jumu'ah with a cloak that is wet, cloak that is drenched in water. The narrator says, I went to Amir al-Mu'mineen and I asked him, O Amir al-Mu'mineen, the day of Jumu'ah, you stand up, you're delivering the sermon, you've come to the mosque, and your cloth, which is wet, is wavering with the wind. It's drenched. Why do you come to lead the salah with clothes or a cloth, with a robe that is wet, cloak that is wet? This Amir al-Mu'mineen, who had disposal of the entire Islamic empire's wealth at his disposal, had only one garment to wear. which he would wash on that Friday, and in that garment come to lead salat. This is leadership in Islam. This is governance in Islam. This is politics in Islam. This is what is required from those people who lead in the name of Islam. This is that Islam that Imam al-Hussein stood up to revive and to implement. When you see this aspect of the seerah of Rasulullah and Amirul Mu'mineen, now you start to understand why the people in power were the first ones to wage war against Amirul Mu'mineen and to conceal the history of Amirul Mu'mineen. Because if the masses were to see this is the expectation of our leaders, they themselves would be overthrown and empowered, dethroned. Not that you have people who call themselves Waliyul Amr and custodians of the holy sites, plundering the wealth of their citizens, while the Islamic Ummah is suffering of hunger. Abadan la. Look at through the history of Bani Abbas and Bani Umayyah. People who devoured the wealth of the citizens to amass for themselves private wealth. This you find even today in the name of Islam. And this is the reason why a majority of the people turn away from the religion to begin with. Crimes committed under the name of Islam. See, the kafir is different. When he commits a crime, he tells you, I'm not Muslim, I'm committing this crime as a tyrant, as an oppressor, as whatever. But the munafiq poses twice as much of a threat in that when he commits that crime, he insists and justifies that crime under the name of Islam, therefore destroying the fiber of Islam. This is what Imam al-Hussein stood up for. أريد أن أأمر بالمعروف وأنهي عن المنكر وأسير في سيرة جدي رسول الله وأبي علي بن أبي طالب. All this Karbala to stand up and revive the true teachings of Rasulullah and Amir al-Mu'mineen. You find in the battle of Hunayn, after the completion of the battle of Hunayn, when the Rasulullah is returning back to Medina and they are passing through a valley between two mountain passes which was extremely narrow. Refer back to every primary source of history which is authored by Muslim historians, regardless of sect. Historians mention as Rasulullah is passing through this narrow pass on a mountain hill below which is a valley, his own companions attempted to assassinate him. Rasulullah comes back to Medina. How did he deal with them? Clemency, forgiveness. Go. Where do you find in the world where a group of people who were guilty of attempted assassination of the head of state, and that head of state pardons them? You find this only and only in the seerah of Rasulullah and in the seerah of Amirul Mu'mineen. Today, Muslim countries under the name of Islam have the worst track record for political pluralism. All in the name of Islam. Every justification for every crime committed in Islam. How many million people truthfully think that this is Islam and blindly follow? How many million other people turn their face away from Islam because of all this? Whose responsibility is it to guide them? This is where our challenge comes into responding to the call of Imam al-Hussein. To show the Islamic Ummah, to show the world in large, the true Islam of Rasulullah and the true Islam of Amirul Mu'mineen, not the Islam of Bani Umayyah and the Islam of Bani Abbas, which is rampant today. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. فَتَبْلِيغ, to enrich ourselves, to educate ourselves on that pure, unadulterated Islamic history of Rasulullah and the Ahlul Bayt. Number one, to invite people towards this true path, to reform themselves and to reform the deen. Number two, and how we respond to that call, Hal min Nasirin Yansuruna, today is going to determine our destiny when it comes to joining the army of the 12th Imam. For the issue, Ahibba'i, is an issue of great seriousness. Tabligh, self-education, reformation, inviting people towards the true Islam, correcting these misconceptions that lead to Islamophobia, becomes our responsibility. If we do not take ownership of the religion, then we give a red carpet and a green light for those who are corrupting Islam to take the platform. We live in a day and an age where we have access to media, a time which has never existed in the history of the Shia, where they would possess, where they would have, where they would own, where they would have at their disposal media, mass media, the ability to reach out to millions of people in order to propagate your faith. This is at a global level, at a communal level. Here in Atlanta, here in Georgia, what are we doing to spread the message of Ahlul Bayt to the wider community? What are we doing to build bridges and to introduce Imam al-Hussein to the wider community over here? It's a responsibility where we cannot be living in a bubble. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Guys, little bit of silence, huh? This is in regards to demonstrating our support for Imam al-Hussein. When you stand on at his grave, at his dari, and you say, وَنُصْرَتِي لَكُمْ مُعَدَّةٌ. What have I done for Imam al-Hussein? In regards to the larger, wider community. Number one. Number two, demonstrating our loyalty towards Imam al-Hussein. How do we demonstrate our loyalty to the Imam in this day and age? You find that ulama tell us that all those actions and all those symbols, all those mannerisms in all their different forms and all their different expressions and within all their different intensities in regards to the commemoration of Imam al-Hussein is collectively known as the Sha'air Husayniyah. Those symbols, those actions, those mannerisms that are related to the commemoration of the revolution of Karbala and Ashura is collectively known as the Sha'air Husayniyah. Therefore, within these Sha'air Husayniyah, you have the institution of Majalis. Majalis, which is a platform of tabligh. Majalis, which is a platform to ensure generation after generation, millions of people will have access to guidance and a chance to salvation. From amongst the Sha'air Husayniyah, you have the Majalis. You have weeping and shedding tears over Imam al-Hussein. You have the institution of Ziyarah. Ziyarah of Imam al-Hussein is one of the greatest demonstrations of loyalty towards Abu Abdullah. And you find that every imam has stressed importance and gone to great extents in order to encourage, in order to establish this institution of ziyarah for the Shia and for the larger Muslim ummah, rather for the entire humanity in general. You find that when you read about Karbala, when you listen to incidences that happened in Karbala, the way the scholars of logic tell us that when you read or when you listen to any incident or any historical piece, for example, the mind creates an image. And generally they say that knowledge are captions of images that are stored within the mind. It's not actually knowledge, it's information. But in any case, for we process information in our minds through images and pictures. You find when you read about Karbala, when you listen about Karbala, you find that you are subconsciously forming an image in your mind and trying to relate to that image. You create a certain conception or a certain perception in your mind about how that historical event may have been, how that historical place may have been, and then you relate to it, and it invokes your emotion. You will find that this is the natural process of thinking. Even you will find yourself, if you were to think, when you were listening, for example, to the Masaib of Abu al-Fadil, salamullah alayh, and you hear that his right arm was severed, and you imagine in your mind straight away creates a picture, an image of a person whose hand is being severed, and you imagine the pouring of that blood, and it triggers the emotion within you, the emotion of grief. And this leads you to a certain level of belief and a certain level of iman. However, this sort of iman is built upon the perceptions or images created within the mind. People have different mental strengths when it comes to envisioning a historical advent. For over here you see the Imam encourages us and tells us, go for ziyarah. I want you to go to Karbala in person and with your eyes. I want you to see where this Imam al-Hussein was killed. I want you to see with your eyes where these arms of Abu al-Fadil were severed. I want you to see with your eyes where the camps of the women were. Because there is a difference when you try to envision a historical incident in your mind, and when you actually go to the historical occurrence of that place and see with your own eyes, you find that your iman and your conviction raises to another status altogether. The Imam doesn't only establish the institution of ziyarah for you to go there and to see, la, but the Imam wants you to relive Karbala. This is an important aspect. To relive Karbala. The Imam's vision was not about us recounting and narrating a historical incident only, la. Imam wanted us to relive the experience of Karbala every year. And there's a great wisdom behind this, even within the field of psychology. If you want to understand the hunger of a hungry person, then subject yourself to hunger. Then you will truly understand the depth of the cry of that orphan or that widow. But this is another thing in psychology. So the Imam tells us, I want you to relive Karbala. I want you to relive that experience and that sensation. I want you to experience what Imam al-Hussein experienced in Karbala. Allahu Akbar. And you find this in Kamilu Ziyarat, in regards to the etiquette of the ziyarah. Let me read for you this hadith. Narrated Kamilu Ziyarat Ibn Qawlaway rahmatullah alayh, narrates a hadith on authority of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayh. Etiquette of ziyarah. How to go and visit Imam al-Hussein. Look what the Imam says. إذا أردت زيارة الحسين فزره وأنت كئيب حزين مكروب شعث مغبر جائع عطشان فإن الحسين قتل حزينا مكروبا شعثا مغبرا جائعا عطشانا. There's a request if you can kindly come forward so that there is space for those who are coming later on. And that request, my dear brothers, please be quiet during Majlis because it's difficult for me to concentrate. Another loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. For the Imam is granting us, or the Imam is giving us instructions on the etiquette on how to visit Imam al-Hussein. Imam al-Sadiq says, when you want to visit Imam al-Hussein, visit him while you are grief-stricken. Visit him when you are sad and filled with grief. Visit him when you are covered in dust and sand. Visit him when you are hungry. Visit him while you are thirsty. For indeed, Imam al-Hussein was killed while he was filled with grief and sadness, covered in dust, hungry and thirsty. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Why did the Imam say this? For us to experience the tiniest of tiniest percentages of the situation which the Imam experienced on the day of Ashura. When you want to relate to the grief of your Imam, you share and be part of that grief by experiencing it. Ajib jiddan. Why this insistence of granting, or why this insistence of performing the ziyarah? Is it just about going and looking where and seeing where the Imam was massacred and seeing how he was massacred and experiencing the grief that he went through? What is that underlining philosophy of the ziyarah? Imam al-Rida says that for every Imam there is a bay'ah which is obligatory upon his Shia. Again, hadith found in Kamil al-Ziyarat. Imam al-Rida says for every Imam, for his followers and his Shia, their bay'ah, their allegiance is obligatory upon them. And the Imam says one of the ways of fulfilling your pledge of allegiance is by going to visit their graves. Allah. You find there's a whole new dimension when it comes to understanding ziyarah. That performing the ziyarah of Imam al-Hussein is an act of pledging allegiance to him. We said at the beginning of the lecture, the Imam is calling out, Hal min nasirin yansuruna. And over here the Imam is teaching us, reply back, respond back to the call of the Imam by going for ziyarah. For indeed the ziyarah is a representation of your pledge of allegiance to the Imam. And you find throughout history, the tyrants and the oppressors went to great extents to persecute those people that went for ziyarah. Such that during the time of Mutawakkil, If a person wanted to go for ziyarah, he had to go through a checkpoint. Where at that checkpoint, if you wanted to continue to proceed with your ziyarah, you would have to pay a fine. Allah, but what type of fine? They would sever your limb. For the first year you go for ziyarah, the fine, the penalty is that they sever your right limb. The next year they sever your left limb. And like that, they begin with your legs. And to sever the limb is not a medical procedure. For a limb to be slashed with a sword. But you find from the insistence of the Shia to go and perform that ziyarah and pledge their loyalty and to pledge their allegiance to the Imam, even at the extent of their limbs, then you find that this saying came out which reflects that symbol of resistance. لو كتأوا أرجلنا وأيدينا لنعطيك زحفا يا حسين. Saying captures the attitude of the people, that even if they cut our hands and our legs, we would come crawling to you, Ya Hussein. The ziyarah of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein became a symbol of resistance to every form of oppression, to every form of tyranny, internal and external. Now you understand why they went to great extents to demolish Karbala. And the kalam on the ziyarah is great. فَعَلَى كُلٍّ, we refer back to our initial kalam. Support or demonstrating loyalty towards the Imam through commemoration of Majlis, through which his revolution is kept alive, through the institution of weeping, where we foster our loyalty and our love with the Imam through the tears that we shed, the institution of ziyarah, which is a pledge of allegiance. And then you have the institution of latam, or the institution of matam, which the way we call it. The institution of azadari. Ahibai, do not take for granted and do not downplay the importance of the institution of azadari. Latam or matam, which through its linguistic definition, latam is to strike the head or the face or the chest or the back. This is a token of loyalty, an expression of grief and anguish, regardless of its intensities, even if it leads to bleeding. This form of azadari is a form that shows and represents this deep grief and anguish which is entrenched in your heart, which you then demonstrate through matam. And you find that the one who was at the forefront of this sunnah was none other than the pure women of Ahlul Bayt. And today I have come with hadith that are well referenced for a number of reasons. The Imam says, this is a hadith in Tahdhib al-Ahkam, Sheikh al-Tusi, hadith al-Mu'tabar. Nobody can become a mujtahid except by mastering Kitab Tahdhib, one of the 5 most reliable books that we have in our faith. Imam al-Sadiq is describing the expression of grief and anguish by the women of Ahlul Bayt upon the martyrdom and the massacre of Imam al-Hussein. Imam al-Sadiq says, وَقَدْ شَقَقْنَا الْجُيُوبِ وَلَتَمْنَا الْخُدُودِ عَلَى الْحُسَيْنِ بْنِ عَلِي وَعَلَى مِثْلِهِ تُلْتَمَ الْخُدُودِ وَتَشُكُّ الْجُيُوبِ. Imam al-Sadiq says, upon the martyrdom of Imam al-Hussein, the women of Ahlul Bayt began to beat their faces out of grief for Imam al-Hussein. An expression of anguish. But in another hadith, which is mentioned in Wasa'il al-Shi'a, this is volume 15, again by Imam al-Sadiq, وَعَلَى مِثْلِ الْحُسَيْنِ فلتشك الجيوب وتخمش الوجوه وتلتم الخدود. Imam al-Sadiq says that it is on the likes of Imam al-Hussein that the faces should be grazed and the faces should be hit. The chests should be hit. This matam is an expression of my grief and my anguish. It's a sunnah which is a sunnah Zainabi. When you stand in that line to do your matam and to hit your chest, in essence, it reflects a philosophy where you were standing up in congregation to say, Ya Aba Abdullah, I am willing and I am ready to stand up to defend you, even if it is at the expense of me experiencing pain in my body. When you stand up in matam and you hit your chest, in essence, the underlining philosophy is that you are telling the Imam, Ya Imam, I am willing to demonstrate my loyalty and to support you by transcending the limitations which my body may pose in front of me in the form of pain. Shi Adim Jiddan. Do not take this to be some ritual act which is just culturally performed. La, it has a deep-rooted effect on your personality, on your wilaya, on your aqidah, on your loyalty towards Ahlul Bayt. It is a preparation and a training ground to achieve that loyalty which is required for you to be from that 313. Even if this form of azadari went to the extent of bleeding and bruising. On the day of Ashura, when this person strikes his head or strikes his back and is covered in blood, what is he trying to say? What does this symbolize? It symbolizes, Ya Imam, my grief because I was not there with you on the day of Ashura. Here I am to show you my loyalty towards you. Ya Imam, much as I am a sinner, I still acknowledge that I am willing to give my life for you, and this is the most humble gesture that I can present to you. This is a concept of azar, which you find has deep roots even within our religion. It has to. Look at what Imam Sahib al-Amri wa Zaman, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu al-Sharif, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Look at what he says in Ziyarat al-Nahiya. I advise you on the eve of Ashura or on the day of Ashura, try and read Ziyarat al-Nahiya. This is the Masa'ib, the lamentation of the 12th Imam. Look at how he describes the atrocities that took place in Karbala. Look at the details which the Imam gives us. Look at the grief. You will be able to sense the grief and the pain with which the Imam is talking. He says, addressing his grandfather, because I was not there for you. I was not able to stand by your side and I was not able to defend you on the day of Ashura. فَلَأَنْدُبَنَّكَ صَبَاحًا وَمَسَاءً وَلَأَبْكِيَنَّ عَلَيْكَ بَدَلَ الدُّمُوعِ دَمًا عَلَيْكَ حَسْرَةً دَمًا فَلَأَبْكِيَنَّ عَلَيْكَ بدل الدموع دما حسرة عليك يا أبا عبد الله. Imam Sahib al-Amri wa Zaman is saying, because I was not there, I was not able to defend you and be by your side, then out of grief I shall lament you every morning and every evening, and I shall weep for you tears of blood. out of grief until I choke from pain. Allahu Akbar. I do not even think we can quantify the magnitude of these words. When Imam al-Hujjah says, I am choking with pain. He says, I shall cry tears of blood for you. A person might come forward and say, Shaykhuna, perhaps this is a metaphorical way of the Imam saying that my pain is deep and intense for Imam al-Hussein. It doesn't mean that it's literal, even though it is established that in extreme cases, the rupture, the eye vessels or the capillary behind the eye can rupture, which leads to bleeding. Person might come and say, no, this is metaphorical. Ya Ahibbai, the structure, grammatical structure of the ziyarah in itself denotes that what the Imam is saying is literal and not metaphorical. He says, وَلَا أَبْكِيَنَّ عَلَيْكَ وَلَا أَبْكِيَنَّ. This la abkiyanna, which is taken from the word abki, the addition of lam and the addition of noon. Before and at the end of the verb is known as adawat ta'kid. In Arabic grammar, if you were to study the most basic books of grammar like Alfiya, Shar ibn Akil, it tells you when these two letters are found accompanying a verb, it means literal 100% occurrence of the action. We have rules of grammar that allow us to distinguish between literal and metaphorical usages of words. Look at what Imam al-Rida says. Uyun al-Akhbar. Inna yawm al-Husayn akraha jufudana wa asbala dumu'ana. Imam al-Rida says, the day of Ashura has wounded our eyelids. Contemplate over what it takes for something as sensitive as the eyelid to be wounded. To participate in this azadari and to not participate in this azadari is a matter of choice that is given to everyone. Freedom which Islam gives us, a freedom which Islam teaches us to respect. We may participate, we may not participate. We may agree, we may not agree, but it does not give us the right to demonize and condemn those who perform this practice, especially when you understand the philosophy behind it. My loyalty for Imam. And if you understand the powerful sentiments which it symbolizes, then you begin to understand why the media would go through great extents to vilify and demonize this act. Aslan, I had spoken about this last year, so I don't wish to repeat this again, but because of the importance, I will mention one part. Two types of medias that we are exposed to. One media that openly advocates hatred against Ahlul Bayt, and the effect of that media, you can see the wars that are breaking out in the Middle East, the wars against the Shia, the effect of that media, the number of foreign jihadists that go and participate in these crimes. That media comes forward and rebukes us. What is the worth of that sort of media? That they should have an effect over me and my religion? One. I say leave them. The atheistic media, materialistic atheistic media would come and condemn us for these actions. I come and I ask you again, what is the value of this media? Aslan, what credibility do they have to come and have the audacity to say that Azadari gives Islam a barbaric image? This atheistic media doesn't even have the right to say that, because it exposes their hypocrisy and double standard. Today, this media, which is telling us that Azadari, which is a token of loyalty towards your Imam, is barbaric, subhanallah, this same media goes on to produce tens, if not 20 or hundreds over the years, horror movies for entertainment. Is this not barbaric? That in the 21st century, you have a group of educated individuals sitting in a theater, watching other people getting decapitated, watching other people getting killed, and you were doing this for entertainment, sipping your Coke and eating your popcorn, watching guts of other people being spilled out in the name of entertainment? This media is calling me barbaric? I call you barbaric to take movies such as these to be a form of entertainment. Which sane-minded individual? I don't want to take names of horror movies on this member. They tell us we advocate violence. How dare? And then we fall victim to their claims. What credibility do they have? A media that claims to talk about, or a media that claims to hold the banner of free speech, but do not have the moral compass to accurately report injustices committed by superpowers against hopeless, helpless people. This is the media whose word I'm going to take. This is the media that I'm going to bow down to and succumb to. Where is the implementation of that sentiment of Imam al-Hussein? Hayhat min al-dhillah. In essence, Azadari reflects a sentiment of revolution. It includes passion and valor to say no to every sort of dhulm. And perhaps our enemies have recognized the potential of this, which is why they will perform and use every sort of sentiment to try and deter the people from it. When you want to wage war on a certain group of people, it's not necessarily that you attack them with military weapons. You have psychological warfare. And the first tool or the first arrow in the quill of a person who's using psychological warfare against you is the weapon of ridicule and mockery. He doesn't ridicule you. He doesn't mock you because he thinks your actions are funny. There's something much deeper than that. The aim of that mockery is to break your determination and to break your self-confidence. This is a tactic that was used, the oldest tactic in the book. This is what they did to Rasulullah. When he came forward as the prophet, they said to him, they tried to deter him from his path in every manner possible. They tried to bribe him, it didn't work. We'll give you all the wealth in the world, we'll give you all the wealth in Hijaz, whatnot. What did Rasulullah say? If you were to give me the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left hand, still I wouldn't take this. They tried to bribe him, it didn't work. They tried to wage war against him. They tried to assassinate him on his deathbed the night of Hijrah. It did not work. When all types of force seemed to be or proved to be of no value or of no effect on Rasulullah, they resorted to calling him a madman, ridiculing him, mocking him, calling him a magician. We need to be people of understanding, not demonize people of the same faith, brothers who share wilayah of Amirul Mu'mineen. Understanding, diversity, love, education, forbearance. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Tonight, the Masa'ib of the youngest battalion of Karbala, Abdullah al-Radhi or Aliyun al-Asghar. Allah, the narration mentions that on the day of Ashura, Imam al-Hussein is standing on the battlefield of Karbala. Not a single family member except for Imam al-Sajjad and his 6-month-old infant. All his family members apart from the two and his companions have been martyred on the plains of Karbala. This is Ali al-Akbar who was killed. This is Qasim who was killed. Even Abbas's body lay without 2 arms by the banks of the Furat. Allah. No more Abbas, no more Habib ibn Madahir, no more Muslim ibn Awsaja. The narration mentions Imam al-Hussein stood on the plains of Karbala, covered in his blood, covered in the blood of his companions. He cried out, Hal min nasirin yansuruna, Hal min mughithin yughithuna. He cried out, is there anyone to help me? Is there anyone to come to our assistance? Is there anyone who fears Allah and would protect the women of the holy household? Allah. The narration mentions that as Imam al-Hussein stood on the battlefield and no one replied to him, he looked towards the bodies of his companions. He said, Oh Habib, where are you? Oh Abbas, wake up from your sleep. Your Imam is calling you towards your help. The narrations mention that at this time the ladies and the women began to weep and wail from inside of the tents. Imam al-Hussein went back into the Mukhayyam, into the Khaymaga. Allah. For those of you who have gone to the ziyarah, we pray to Allah to give all of us a chance to go for the ziyarah of Imam al-Hussein. But those of you who have gone, I want you in this masa'ib to walk with me and to walk with Imam al-Hussein from the Khaymaga to the maqam where Ali al-Asghar was made shaheed. Allah. The narration mentions that as the women began to weep and wail, Imam al-Hussein went into the Khaymaga or into the Mukhayyam, asking them the reason of this weeping and wailing. The narration mentions that at this point, Sayyida Zainab came up to him and she said that as you were wailing and you were crying out, Hal min nasirin yansuruna, this infant of ours began to violently shake within his cradle. Allah. Imam al-Hussein asked Sayyida Zainab to bring this infant to him. We call him Ali al-Asghar, is also known as Abdullah al-Radi. Abdullah the infant, the suckling infant. The narration mentions that Sayyida Zainab brought this infant to Imam al-Hussein, an infant of 6 months, so tender, so gentle. Sayyida Zainab says to Imam al-Hussein, Oh my brother Hussein, his mother is not able to feed him any milk for the last 3 days because she herself has not been able to eat or drink. Allah. The narration mentions that Imam al-Hussein took Ali al-Asghar in his hand. The narrations that mention that Ali al-Asghar, and he was in the arms of Imam al-Hussein, he was not crying. Why? Because in order to cry, a baby needs energy, a baby needs nutrition to be able to cry. The narration mentions that this 6-month-old infant, due to the intensity of the thirst and the hunger, this 6-month-old infant, his eyes had sunk into his head and he was making a screeching sound, struggling to make himself heard. Allah. The narration mentions that when Imam al-Hussein saw this baby infant, he took him in his arm and he kissed him on his forehead. The narration mentions he then took Abdullah al-Radi or Ali al-Asghar outside the Khaymaga towards the Maidan. He covered Ali al-Asghar with his Abba such that the rays of the sun may not fall upon him. I say, Ya Imam al-Hussein, you are taking care to cover your infant from the scorching sun, but what will you do when that arrow of Harmala comes? Allah. The narration mentions Imam al-Hussein went towards the Maidan. He stood in between the middle of the enemies. The enemies, when they saw him covering something in his abaya, they thought that he has brought the Quran and that he wants to form some sort of treaty or some sort of agreement through the Quran. When Imam al-Hussein stood, now this is at the maqam of the maqtal of Ali al-Asghar, which you find in Karbala. Imam al-Hussein stood and he unveiled his abba, he lifted up the baby infant Ali al-Asghar. He addressed them and he said to them, "O people, you have killed all my companions, and you have killed all my companions, and you have killed all my family members. If there is any animosity and there is anything wrong that we the adults have done, then do not punish this infant for my sins. He is indeed innocent." The narration mentions that the army looked at each other and began talking to each other, discussing on whether they should feed him water or not. At this time, Umar ibn Sa'ad said he is using the infant as an excuse to quench his own thirst. The narration mentions that when Imam heard this, he put Ali al-Asghar on the burning sands of Karbala and he took a step back. He said, "O people, if you think that I shall drink this water, then you feed the baby with water by yourself." The narration mentions at this time Ali al-Asghar removed his tongue from his mouth. The narration mentioned that the army looked at each other, they began to weep. Some of them were saying, "Give him the water," some of them were saying no. Umar ibn Sa'ad turns towards Hurmala the archer. He says to him, "O Hurmala, this infant can be the cause of a potential mutiny in my army. I want you to kill and I want you to finish off the reason for the disagreement in my army." As they were discussing, Imam al-Hussein picked up his infant. He held him in his arms. The narration mentions, this is an attestation from Hurmala himself, Allah. Hurmala says that I stood between the ranks of all the archers. I took out an arrow. Allah, but what type of arrow, Hurmala? The narration mentions he used a three-pronged arrow, which is used to get through the skin of a camel neck. Allah, this is an infant, Hurmala. The narration mentions, Hurmala says that I put my arrow into the bow and I was looking and examining which part of the infant's body should I pierce. At this time, a breeze blew across Karbala. The cloth that was covering the tender neck of Ali al-Asghar became exposed. Hurmala says, I saw a tiny neck that was shining like silver, and I said, this is the spot of my target. The narration mentions, Allah, ya Shi'at Ali. Hurmala struck the arrow. The target was Ali al-Asghar. One tradition mentions, فَضَرَبَهُ بِالْوَرِيدِ إِلَى الْوَرِيدِ. The arrow that Hurmala shot entered, pierced one part of the jugular vein of Ali al-Asghar and came out shattering the other, shattering the throat of this infant in the arms of his father. Allah, the narration mentions that as the blood began to flow and sprite out of the neck of Ali al-Asghar, Imam al-Hussein took the blood that was pouring out. He took it in his palms and he said, Ya Allah, my only power and my only hope is that I know that you are watching over this crime. He then threw up the blood towards the sky. Imam al-Baqir says not a single blood of drop fell back to the earth. And then as the blood began pouring out from the jugular vein, Imam al-Hussein took the second handful of blood that was coming out and then he poured it on his face and his beard, and he said, Ya Allah, this is how I will meet you on the day of judgment, and this is how I'm going to complain to you of how this ummah has treated me. Allah, I want to give you one narration over here. The narration mentions that when the arrow struck the throat of Ali al-Asghar, he began to quiver in the arms of his father, just like the way a fish quivers when it is brought out of water. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Ma'tabi Hussein.
Safe.